Good morning. This is Laura Tibbetts in the system office. I'm showing 11 o'clock. And with that, we have our committee present. So I will turn the call over to Chair Flores.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Telephonic Rules and Regulations Committee meeting for May 11, 2022. I am Regent Don Flores, chair of this committee. The time is 11 a.m. Central Daylight Savings Time. Notice of this meeting was provided to the Secretary of State as required by Texas Open Meetings Act, Government Code, Chapter 551. Please note that the audio of this meeting is being recorded live. Before we take a roll call, I would like to remind everyone to please mute their phones unless you need to speak. Laura, let's begin the roll call with committee members and any other regents.
Thank you, Chair Flores. I'll start with you.
Present.
Regent Foskey.
Present.
Regent Tinsley.
Here.
Thank you. And I believe I saw Regent Harrell.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Do we have any other regents on the call? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. May we have a roll call of system office and component representatives?
Sure. Chancellor McCall.
Here.
Nellie Herrera.
Here.
Daniel Harper.
Here.
Therese Sternenberg.
Here.
Derek Alexander.
Here.
John Hayek.
Here.
Carol Fox.
Here.
Sean Cunningham.
Here.
Malou Gonzalez.
Here.
Mike Winnemute.
Here.
Ashley Spicer Reynolds.
Here.
Did I miss anyone from the system staff? Okay, and I'll move down to our components, starting with Lamar.
Jamie Larson.
Thank you. Sam Houston.
Elisa White.
Carlos Hernandez.
Amanda Withers.
Thank you. Sol Ross.
Jim Goodman.
Do I have anyone else from Sol Ross? Okay, thank you. Texas State.
Denise Trouth here, along with Jean Bourgeois, Eric Algo, Lisa Lloyd, and Ken Pierce.
Thank you, Dr. Trout. LIT.
Lonnie Howard, Rudy Gonzalez, Amanda Rutherford.
Thank you. Lamar State College Orange.
Tom Johnson, Mary Wickland, Wendy Elmore.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And Lamar State College Port Arthur. I know we have Mary Wickland. Do we have Dr. Renard? Okay, thank you. And did I miss anyone else on roll call?
And Laura, this is Jim Goodman. President Gallego is on. For some reason, he just can't unmute his microphone right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. All right. Well, with that, I'll turn it back to Chair Flores.
Thank you, Laura. With that, I'd like to note that Nellie Herrera briefed me on the agenda items prior to the meeting. At this time, I ask that she present the Rules and Regulations Committee agenda items.
Thank you, Chairman Flores, and good morning to everybody on the call. Today we have a total of 11 amendments being proposed to our system rule. The first amendment is located on page RR1 or in board book if you're following along in the board book at page 265. The amendment is to Chapter 3, Paragraph 1.1. It's entitled Items Requiring Board Approval. Now, as we all know, our system rules require contracts of $1 million or more to be presented to the board for their consideration and approval. However, there are exceptions to this general rule. The proposed amendment would add another exception to this rule, as board approval would no longer be required or needed for software maintenance agreements, renewal or extensions of such agreements, or for software maintenance agreements for network service contracts. All of these contracts would be exempt from board approval, even when the contracts cumulatively exceed $1 million threshold. The amendment was initially proposed by Texas State. So Dr. Trout, would you or anyone on your team like to comment on this amendment?
Ken Pierce is on the call. So Ken, do you want to address this?
Yes, so this was brought forward to handle situations where our software maintenance agreements, so it's all about maintenance and ownership in this particular instance, where we've had licenses for software that we have purchased in the past and have been paying maintenance on the software for years. We have some that date back to 2004, where we've been paying maintenance on software since then. And over time, in this case, about 18 years, and for a lot of these agreements, more than 10 years, we've been paying, and now they're starting to hit the thresholds that are set forth for the purchasing. So this really is to say that we would not bring that to the board after the cumulative spend hits the $1 million threshold.
Chairman Flores, unless there are any questions regarding this First Amendment, I'll proceed to the next one.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item, please.
The second proposed amendment to our rules is located on page RR2 or Board Book 266. Similar to the very first proposed amendment we just discussed, this amendment would add another exception to Chapter 3, Paragraph 1.1. Under this amendment, contracts to purchase fuel for a component's operations would no longer require board approval. It's my understanding that contracts to purchase fuel often exceed $1 million threshold. And this amendment, I believe, was brought forward both by Texas State and Vice Chancellor Daniel Harper. Dr. Trout or Daniel would like to comment further on this one.
Thank you, Nellie. Yeah, so to kind of reiterate some of Nellie's points, the original motion spoke to a cogeneration plant, which Texas State does have a cogeneration plant on campus. However, it is not operational. And then to follow up on that, since the board has already approved the purchase of buses and the purchase of generators, the presumption is that we would not go back to get approval to purchase the fuel for those.
Chairman Flores, unless there are any questions about this one, I'll proceed to the next item.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item.
Well, keeping the trend of amendments to Chapter 3, the next item is a proposed amendment that would basically exclude football game contracts from board approval. So under this amendment, in other words, football game contracts would no longer require board approval. However, the amendment would make clear that such contracts will still require approval by the chancellor if the contract exceeds the $500,000 threshold. It's my understanding this amendment was initially brought forward by Sam Houston State University and Vice Chancellor Harper. Dr. Wider or Daniel, would either of you like to comment on this one?
Thank you for the opportunity, Vice Chancellor Herrera. So the issue for us is timing as we move to Conference USA, which would move our level to FBS, similarly to what Texas State has now. We will have the opportunity for some game guarantees that exceed the $500,000 threshold, and sometimes it's even more in FBS than allowed under FCS. And a lot of times those games are quickly decided based on some cancellation or a hurricane or something like that. And so time is of the essence, and we would appreciate your consideration.
Chairman Flores, unless there are any questions about this one, I'll proceed to the next one.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item, please.
So our fourth proposed rule change is located on page RR4 or Board Book 268. This is our final proposed amendment to Chapter 3 for this morning. Under this amendment, lab fees would no longer be required or to be presented to the board for approval. However, the proposed rule change also amends Chapter 4, Paragraph 2, by granting to component presidents the responsibility for establishing these lab fees. I'll call on Vice Chancellor Harper to see if you'd like to make any comments about this one.
Yes, ma'am. So the lab fees historically had been under the authority of the presidents, and when we redid 1.4 of mandatory tuition and fees, I by accident included lab fees, which had not necessarily been an issue. However, statute requires that the lab fees match the actual cost of offering the lab for that specific semester. And so we have some issue in trying to set a fee that reflects the actual cost while also having to go back to the board to set those. And since the fees are fairly minimal, $4 to $30 across the system, proposed that for logistics sake that authority go back to the presidents to set.
Thank you, Daniel. Chairman Flotis, if there are any questions on this one, I will proceed to the next one.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item.
Our fifth proposed amendment is located at RR5 or Board Book, page 269. This amendment is being proposed to Chapter 3, Paragraph 10.22. The chapter deals with system component operations. This amendment clarifies the Chancellor's authority to approve contracts in excess of $1 million, even when such contract is exempt from board approval by our system rules. And Daniel, would you like to comment on this one?
Yes, so this has been our presumption, is that the understanding has been that the president's authority, in generally speaking, limits to 500,000, and that the chancellor's authority generally limits to 1 million. And so we're just clarifying or codifying in the rules that interpretation.
Thank you. Chairman Flotis, unless there are questions on this one, I'll proceed to the sixth item.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next.
Thank you. The sixth proposed amendment is located on page RR6 or Board Book, page 270. This is a proposed amendment to the system's patent policy. It's located in Chapter 3, Paragraph 12. The amendment adds language to the patent policy permitting student ownership of inventions and discoveries while the student is engaged in coursework, provided certain criteria are met. The criteria are laid out in the proposed amendment. Now, the amendment was initially proposed by Texas State, and OGC worked with Texas State on the language to this amendment. Dr. Trout, would you or someone on your team like to comment on the proposal?
I'd like to ask Jean Bourgeois to comment on it.
Yes, thank you. This simply allows students who are not necessarily employees the right or the privilege to also own any discoveries or inventions that they develop while engaged in coursework and related to coursework. Currently, they are excluded from that ownership privilege unless they are employees.
Thank you, Dr. Bourgeois. Chairman Flotis, unless there are questions to this item, I'll proceed to the next one.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item.
Thank you. The seventh proposed amendment is located at page RR8 or page Board Book 272. The amendment is to Chapter 4, Paragraph 3. It's the chapter entitled Precedence of the Components. Now, this amendment does three things. It deletes some obsolete references to telephone services. It requires board approval before a component-owned residence for a president may be purchased or sold unless the value of the residence is within the chancellor's authority for real property. And the amendment also requires that permanent modifications or improvements to the residence in excess of $5,000 be approved by the chancellor. Daniel, would you like to speak to this item?
Well, no, I think you did a fantastic job laying it out.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
No further comments.
Chancellor, thank you. Chairman Flotis, unless there are any other questions, I'll proceed to the next one.
Are there any questions on this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item.
The eighth proposed amendment is located on page RR9 or Board Book 273. Now, this is an amendment to our grievance policy, and that grievance policy is found in Chapter 5, Paragraph 2. The proposed changes to the rule will do a few things. One, it will ensure that employees have an opportunity to grieve certain types of employment-related grievances through either a process established by the component or a process established by our system rules, but not both. In the past, there had been confusion by individuals believing that they had an entitlement to go through a process both established by the component and then a subsequent process established by the system. This amendment clarifies that that is not the case. You pick one or the other. The proposed change to the rule will also ensure that the process used by the component is within the parameters laid out in the system's grievance policy. And finally, the proposed rule clarifies that a component president may delegate the hearing and decision-making functions in the grievance to either another office on their component or to another designee or employee to hear the matter. Chairman Flotis, unless there are any questions to this one, I'll proceed to the next item.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item.
The ninth item is located at page RR11, and it's in Board Book 275. So this amendment creates a new policy on consensual relationships. The new policy would add Chapter 5, Paragraph 2, and it is entitled Consensual Relationships. The new policy requires disclosure of consensual romantic relationships or sexual interactions between supervisors and supervisees. The purpose of the policy is to give components the opportunity to resolve potential conflicts or favoritism that may be created by such relationships. Chairman Flotis, if there are any questions about this one, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next item.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next item.
The 10th item is located at page RR13 or Board Book page 277. The amendment is pretty straightforward. It is an amendment to Chapter 5, Paragraph 4. It eliminates the requirement for a faculty member to present agreements in person. It became evidence during the height of the pandemic that requiring in-person delivery of these grievances was very problematic. So this amendment eliminates that requirement and hopefully avoids that problem in the future. Chairman Flotis, if there are any questions about this, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll proceed to the last item.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Nellie, please proceed to the next.
So our 11th item is it's located at page RR4 or Board Book 278. The proposal amends Chapter 4, Paragraph 2 regarding admission standards and requirements. And the proposed amendment basically adds a test optional admission. For this, I'll call on Vice Chancellor Hayek, see if you'd like to comment on this proposal.
Thank you, Nellie. As a reminder, during COVID, students had no or minimal access to major college admission testing services such as ACT and SAT. So our universities brought forward temporary changes to their undergraduate admission standards to move to test optional, using a more holistic approach to the admission decision-making process. This policy provides our institutions, or the change to the policy provides the institutions the flexibility to make their test optional admissions standards permanent. Very quickly, this has become common practice for overwhelming majority of colleges and universities in Texas and across the country.
Thank you. Chairman Flotis, unless there are any questions about this last item, this concludes the presentation this morning.
Are there any questions regarding this item? Thank you. Thank you, Nellie. Regent Foskey, are there any items that you would like to move off the consent agenda for consideration by the full board? Regent Foskey?
No, there's not any.
No?
No.
Oh, thank you. Regent Tinsley, are there any items that you would like to move off the consent agenda for consideration by the full board?
No, there is not.
Thank you. As no one is requesting that we move any of the items off the consent agenda, Regent Foskey and Regent Tinsley, I move that we recommend board approval of the proposed changes to the system rules on the consent agenda. Regent Foskey, do you agree? Regent Foskey, do you agree?
Sorry, I had trouble with my phone. Yes, I agree.
It's okay. Thank you. Regent Tinsley, do you agree?
Agreed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Regents Foskey and Regent Tinsley, for your responses. In light of them, the proposed changes for the system rules will remain on the consent agenda with the committee's recommendation for approval. As there are no further items to consider, this concludes the business of the Rules and Regulations Committee and concludes today's telephonic meeting. Thanks to everyone for calling and participating. And for the record, the time is 11:21 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get better at *6.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.